say a few words on this occasion.
Ma'am, she could not join due to some issues. She may join later.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, sir, it's okay. So now I would like to welcome our speaker for today, Professor Manzoor Ahmed Shah. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation for this webinar. Before I ask Professor Shah to give us the deliberation, I would like to give a brief introduction of the speaker before he takes over. Dr. Manzoor Ahmed Shah is currently working as professor at the Department of Botany, University of Kashmir, and has been a faculty affiliate at the University of Montana, USA, and a visiting professor at King Saud University, Riyadh. His basic research interests pertain to various aspects of Himalayan biodiversity, as freshwater ecosystems, plant invasion biogeography, and plant-soil microbe interactions. He has published 2 books and more than 90 research papers and book chapters. And he has been awarded several national and international fellowships and prestigious awards, such as Indo-US 21st Century Knowledge Initiative Award, DPT Crest Award, Gold Medal from Indian Academy of Environmental Sciences, the Canadian Commonwealth Exchange Fellowship, Doctoral Internship Award by Canadian Bureau of International Education, Young Scientist Grad Award by Federation of European Microbiological Societies. And the list of achievements is very long, but there are 2 accomplishments I would like to highlight. Here. They are: he has served as Director of Quality Assurance and steered the University of Kashmir from grade A to A+ by NAC. And as Coordinator RUSA, he is presently regulating the highest research and innovation grant received by the university. Now I request Professor Shah to take over, and he will be delivering on global environment scenario. And the topic of his webinar is Reimagining the Global Environment to Avoid Tragedy of Commons. We would be delighted to have your suggestions and questions at the end of this event. Over to Professor Manzoor Ahmed Shah.
Thank you very much, Professor Susanna ji, and your colleagues for having given me this opportunity to interact with the students or the faculty who are the participants. It's a pleasure indeed. And since I suppose the programs that you're organizing, you are doing it under the larger auspices of the World Environmental Day organizations and the other related objectives. So I thought better to talk about something which is concerning one and all, especially the hard times of pandemic has taught us the lesson, how important basically that one health issue is globally now recognized in terms of, say, when we talk about human health, we have to be equally cognizant of the environmental health, ecosystems and ecology. So after your nice introduction, although I'm embarrassed personally by these elaborated introductions, so let me come directly to the topic that we are supposed to deliberate upon, and I hope I can share the screen. I can, right? Let me check. Just a second. Okay. Do you get my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Good. Well, as you can see from the title itself, so this is the time when we need to really rethink about the global environment, about the local environment. In case we want to really dispel what is commonly called as the tragedy of commons. I am sure that you must have heard about and learned about, the term tragedy of commons, how it has evolved. Because, I mean, I don't think we could have a better time ever to understand this term than these pandemic times. Because if you look at the causes of the pandemic for that matter, globally now it is a consensus that this is something that is the result of, you know, that that selfish economic being rather than human being, what we have been over the past many decades, that we have uh, utilized the natural resources regardless of their fair share to rest of the stakeholders, and ultimately we end up with what we call as the tragedy of commons, right? Now let me put this term tragedy of commons at the outset in the perspective. Global human population is surely on an unsustainable path. This is what we have demonstrated by our actions over the past many decades, especially post industrialization period, right? So what has basically driven the market values have been the main driving forces of the world. Nothing makes sense in the world except in the light of economy, money, and material things. And while achieving uh, those criteria of progress, we are primarily driven as individuals by the self-interests, right? So I mean, this is what is quite common in our Kashmir context also, or elsewhere in the world, in India or any place, that we think that the resources, that natural resources are there, they're only for me, right? So we are somehow in the heart of hearts very selfish beings that way, isn't it? And that is why we exploit these resources to the maximum possible we can, given all our potential and the resources. And what happens as a result is because of the individual actions, we have to collectively suffer. There's a concept of ecological footprint analysis. I'm sure you might have read about it, what this is. Ecological footprint analysis tells you globally how many resources there are, how much of resources do we have, and how nature has provided a fair share for each and every individual who exists on this planet Earth. But unfortunately, given the fact that this human being, which used to be called as Homo sapiens, is now more preferably called as Homo economicus, because they say as we live in an era which is called as the Anthropocene, a human dominated era. Humans have done it, for that matter. Now, the fact of the matter is that this in this Anthropocene, we as human beings have expressed ourselves completely and fully in the capitalist market economy, right? Because we make a lot of money, and if you make a lot of money, you are considered in the society as the most successful person, regardless of the fact, अगर आपको दो लफ्ज भी नहीं आते हैं, अगर आप देखोगे, I mean, in our Kashmir context also, only many years back, you would find that those people who were really knowledgeable people, they were most respected people. But now, regardless of the knowledge that you have, if you don't have money, you are no longer respected. Look at, for example, the biggies of the world, right? If you look at the resources of the world, they are shared, I must tell you, by just around 5% people who are called as those billionaires, right? Ambani, say for example, this Ambani is considered as one of the most successful, giants of the present times, isn't it? Now, the fact of the matter is, this is what the tragedy that we are basically actually facing. Are you getting my point? Only 5%, less than 5% of the people are sharing the global resources. And they are doing so at the cost of all other people who share this planet otherwise with them. And that is what basically leads to, you see, this tragedy of commons has its own history. It was way back in first 1868 around, when that Baldwin basically suggested this term on the basis of this grazing land concept. You say, for example, grazing land is a common land, right? But if only one or the two owners go there and they graze their cattle, they will eat all the grass, and rest of the grass would not be, any grass would not be left for people who also have the cattle or the sheep for that matter, right? So because of the selfish actions of individuals or just a few members of the society, collectively the whole society has to suffer. Similarly, if you look at the global environment, we have been somehow exploiting it to our best possible way to serve our economic interests. And what we ultimately end up with is the problem of climate change, the problem of what we now call as the sixth mass extinction of the species, the problem of infectious diseases, as we see right now, isn't it? So this Anthropocene, this human-dominated era, is basically an era of unprecedented ecological crisis. There is no doubt about it, right? If you look at, for instance, the graph on the right side, it shows, the proportion of the global number of species that have been declining, extinction of species, birds, mammals, plants. This has been really dramatic. There has been dramatic population decline in many species globally, right? And this biodiversity eradication, this extinction of valuable native species in any regional context has drastic influences or impacts on the invaluable ecosystem services we get from this biodiversity. Dear colleagues and students, you might have heard about this term anthropogenic allele effect. You know what this is? This effect actually precisely, sums up what I have discussed so far, because they say that we exploit our environment, our ecology, our natural habitats, our natural resources to the fullest. And once we realize at the end of the day that this resource has, or this species has significantly declined and it is now on the brink of extinction, then we use all our resources to bring it back from the point of extinction. Look at the number of projects that are granted world over for conservation of, species that are threatened or that are, rare, right? And we have actually been the primary source of drawing them to the point of, extirpation or extinction, right? And then we use all our resources to bring them back. This is a paradoxical situation, what is called as the anthropogenic allele effect. So, dear colleagues, the climate change issue is such a reality now. In today's newspaper, only you might have read, or in the news you might have seen, that the General Secretary of the United Nations have been given the second term. Do you know why he has been given the second term? Today only. Because he says that, his primary focus actually will be now the climate change. Because globally now, it's realized that we are facing most of the problems primarily because of these global environmental changes. And we are losing biodiversity to the extent that, as they say, that we are now approaching the sixth mass extinction. I will not talk more about infectious diseases because this is something we are witnessing day in and day out. So the global consensus is that these infectious diseases also basically emerge primarily because of the devastation that we have done to the environment over the period of time, right? So, and it is because of this It is because of this realization globally that if you look at the most of the sustainability goals or sustainable development goals by the United Nations, most of the goals are somehow linked to this environmental degradation. For example, be it the clean water and sanitation goal, be it the affordable clean energy goal, be it life on land and life below water goal, right? Be it climate action goal, be it for that matter, even the poverty reduction, right? These are basically these are the globally recognized, the 18 sustainable uh, development goals by the UN. I don't need to overemphasize it. So in the heart of these goals, if you look at, as they commonly say, that there are 5 or 6 major P's. People, when we talk about human beings, the planet, we have to talk about human health, for example, people, planet, ecosystem health, for that matter, prosperity, sustained economic and technological growth. Peace is a major issue globally, right? Nobody else can appreciate it better than people like us. Partnerships, for that matter, right? Improving all these are somehow nestled within basically these environmental issues, right? And I was somehow reading, somebody sent me a message this morning. What is a poison? I thought better to put it here, what a poison is. He says that anything which you have more than what you need ultimately becomes a poison. If you have more power than what you need, if you have more laziness, more ego, more ambition, similarly more resources, they become a poison for you. And if you look at this statement in the little more depth, you will appreciate, yes, it's a fact. Anyways, so once we talk about reimagining the global environment, once we talk about rethinking about the global environmental issues, how do we rethink about them? We have to have a sense of the value that these natural resources or the natural ecosystems have. And one of the ways you quantify the values, although it is very difficult to, there are 2 types of values we get from the natural resources. We get the economic goods from these natural resources, and then we get the ecosystem services. Economic goods we can quantify, of course, in some sort of values, but it's very hard to quantify the ecosystem services. For example, if I ask you to quantify how valuable a species is, can you quantify it easily? It has been a long debate. One of the world's leading conservation biologists was once asked how worth a species is, and his response was, it depends upon the world that you want to live in. Then he was sort of stressed, can you give some economic tag? He said that one species can be worth GDP of most of the nations, right? And then he explains it also. Since we don't have much time, my point here is that if you look at the ecosystem services, the supporting services, for example, we get from this biodiversity or from the natural environment. Supporting services, for example, the biodiversity, all are, whatever we eat or whatever we wear owes its origin to the biodiversity. Habitats, photosynthesis, soil formation, these are all supporting services, right, of the natural ecosystems. Then we have cultural aspects, aesthetics, spiritual, recreation, right? Look at the Dal Lake, for example, we have here. It has its own cultural context. Then it does a lot of this groundwater recharging. It finds a lot of place in our traditional poetry and prose as well, as a symbolic thing. And any one of us who basically feels stressed after the day's work would like to take a drive and enjoy the foreshore or further this, to get relaxed. This is also a value, right? My point is, there are a number of regulating values and the provisioning values. And now globally, you might have heard about this IPBS, Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. This is like IPCC, a global body, which looks at these ecosystem services, and they call it as nature's contribution to people, which I discussed in the other talk a couple of days back. So how much nature contributes to people is something we need to understand, then only we can value. But if we do not value nature, these ecosystem services, their colleagues and students become ecosystem disservices. For example, look at the air. I mean, this is a blessing. Look at the oxygen, for example, we enjoy free of cost. And this pandemic has taught us how worthy it is, right? Because you would not get an oxygen cylinder sometimes worth 50,000 or 1 lakh rupees also in the crisis times. And once we pollute this air, I mean, when this air is polluted, this becomes a disservice. I mean, we are basically inhaling these pollutants. This becomes a source of problem. Instead of service, it becomes a disservice, right? It becomes a source of allergens. It becomes a source of pathogens. So it has direct human health impacts. Likewise, you have impact on the build. For example, because of our actions, we see this Dal Lake, for example, here is just one photograph giving you an idea of the invasion in our water bodies. These invasions have basically they have compromised the quality of these natural ecosystems, right? So look at the increase in the instance of forest fires, crimes, security issues, cultural issues, what are the disservices, right? There is some background noise. Can you please mute the mic? Background noise. Can you please mute your mic? Background is coming. Anyways, so my point is that if we do not value these ecosystem services, if we do not conserve our ecosystem well, if we do not manage them well, services that these ecosystem services provide us become which is basically right? Now, sorry, please, there's a background noise. Please fix it. There's a background noise for the teaching. I request everybody to basically mute your mics because there is some background noise. Anyway, the point that I was making is that how do we assess this? Now, if we look at these global who is unfortunately disturbing us all, I request organizers to ensure to basically stop this background noise. Otherwise, I cannot speak. Anyway, so I was telling you, how do we assess this basically the damage that happens to the global environment? We have to understand its drivers first. As I said, one of the major drivers is what you call it, the human drivers. We have basically transformed the global ecosystems like anything. When you look and how do we do that? If you look at the pressures in terms of land use changes, in terms of climate change, in terms of pollution, in terms of invasion, water use, all these basically are. Then there are natural drivers also, right? And then there are policy drivers also. Our policies are not probably good enough. Sometimes there are very natural drivers. We cannot do much with that, but we have to somehow disentangle the natural and the anthropogenic. And all these drivers and pressures lead to the changes in the biodiversity, and that in turn leads to the change in the ecosystem functioning, right? And all these together basically lead to the changes in the ecosystem services that I was talking about, right? And dear colleagues, let me tell you, the changes in these ecosystem services ultimately translate into the impact on the human quality of life, human well-being, human welfare, isn't it? Therefore, our response, if our response is not apt, if it is not timely, if it is not accurate, we are going to basically face the music as we do right now. I will give you a small example. Say, climate change is a reality, especially now in the Himalayan context, we realize it, right? And there are indicators beyond doubt that tell you, yes, climate is changing. And how does this climate change actually influence our natural ecosystems? I will give you an example of wetlands, for example, here. If you look at the literature globally, it has been shown that the number of functioning wetlands is going to decline because of the climate change. And not only that, location of many types of wetlands is also going to shift. And then if that is the case, how do we monitor it? Do we have any long-term monitoring mechanism in place, say in the Kashmir Himalayan context? Because we know these water bodies are the most precious resources that we have. Say, how can we do that? If we have to monitor the impact of climate change on wetlands, we have to monitor it on the basis of certain major parameters. Say, for example, hydrology is going to change the hydrology of the system. So do we have any record of water depth over the period of time, water quality, water transparency, water nutrient status, so on and so forth? Habitability, right? Habitats, it is going to change that. Invasions, biological invasions is said to be a direct manifestation of the anthropogenic pressures and then the climate change. And in the context of climate change, how many exotics are going to be more successful at the cost of native species is still something not clearly known. And then there are many uncertain ways it is going to happen. So my point is that if we want to monitor, do we have if, for example, if we want to reimagine our environmental scenarios locally here. So in that reimagination, can we think of any long-term plan that we have for monitoring these changes? Because elsewhere in the world, if you look at US and Europe and other places also in Africa for that matter, there are now what you call as the LTEOs, long-term ecological observatories, which have the data of more than 150 years. And it is this long-term data that actually, feeds your policy, that informs your policy decisions. And if you take decisions on the basis of their data, those decisions would be really apt. Otherwise, taking an example of the Dal Lake, for example, if you look at the resources that we have spent over the period of time on Dal Lake management, if you look at the effort that has gone into this, the dividends are not probably commensurate with that, not at all. Why? Problem is that probably our policy is not driven by the real science, right? It's just a kind of patchy work approach, so on and so forth. So for these wetlands, for example, I'm telling you, one thing that we need to very clearly differentiate, that anthropogenic and natural changes. I told you about before this, that there are human drivers, there are natural drivers. What are the natural drivers of change? They have to be kept separate, and human drivers, because these ecosystems are aging. We know that aging of ecosystems is a natural phenomenon. Even if we do not do anything, if there would not have been any anthropogenic pressure, still these lakes and wetlands as a natural process of succession would surely age and transform into the different systems during the course of time. But the pace of that changing has been significantly enhanced by the anthropogenic activities, right? So what is very important is that we have to disentangle these anthropogenic and the natural drivers, right? External and the internal factors, right? What are the external factors that drive the change in the Dal Lake, for example? And what are the internal factors that drive? We have to actually devise our strategies accordingly. And then we have to actually, most important, we see that climate change is a global phenomenon. We cannot deal it necessarily locally. Of course, it needs local action as well, but it needs a global consensus action as well. The point that I want to make is that we can reduce these non-climatic stressors at least. This will surely increase the ecosystem resilience, because the other stressors, for example, the encroachment, pollution, nutrient enrichment, all these things are basically something which we can tackle. So that is why I mean, just giving an example of a project that we did, which was supported by the UNDP with A3. And if you look at the Dal Lake, I can share that report with you or all those people who are interested in that. Biodiversity of the system. For this, you have to have an expert group. Likewise, for watershed, for water quality, socioeconomic part, policy and governance part. These are the different aspects of the Dal Lake ecosystem, right? And if we only look at the water quality or this weed removal, this is not going to basically fetch us. So what are the socioeconomic drivers? This is a unique system basically in which we have people living in the system. And until and unless you do not make them part of this, system, you cannot achieve much progress. So time has taught us that shifting Dal dwellers to other places has not helped at all. They ultimately come back to the Dal Lake for the economic activity during the day, because their livelihood is linked to that, until unless we do not address that issue. So my point is, when we look at natural ecosystems, we have to look at it holistically. That is why there is what we call as now the One Health approach, right? So which takes into consideration all these basically aspects. Now, I believe since this program is organized by your NSS wing, not the NSS wing, sorry, your IQAC and this botany department, but somewhere I was thinking that there was a talk probably previously by the NSS wing as well. I want to tell you something. This environment, we are teachers and we deal with the students, and we need to inculcate in the students that spirit of volunteerism, so far as environment is concerned. And if you travel around the world, you will see that there are some real good examples of this volunteerism. I have seen a number of instances. I don't think we have time to basically share all those things. A couple of anecdotes I will share. My first trip was to France way back in 2004 or 5 probably. And in the evening when I went out, I saw a pretty old man walking with that stick. And he's a very old man. I must have been more in his 90s, more than that. And I found him that his stick had that, that sort of the instrument that we use to pluck their grasses. And he, while taking a walk on the street, in the crevices of those tiles, path tiles, he would basically pluck that up. And then out of curiosity, I asked him, what are you doing? He said that since I am an old man, I take this evening walk every day. And while doing it, I think that I'm doing this service to my community. At least I'm plucking these, right? This is, for example, a photograph that I shared with you recently when in 2019, after that, when the lockdown started everything. Just before the lockdown, we were in the US, this is the Yellowstone National Park, the world's first national park, as you might be knowing. So we were there, and I found this gentleman plucking these invasive species from the park. Since I work on the invasive species, we stopped and interacted with this gentleman. And I asked him, say, what are you doing? He said that I have recently retired, and now I volunteer my services for this park because this seems to be now getting taken over by these alien weeds. So at least I'm doing this. I asked whether are you being paid for this or not. He said, no, I'm not being paid. I do everything of my own. I don't need money, but I think I'm doing this for the community. So this type of volunteerism we do not have here. I gave you the example of this Dal Lake, project, UNDP project. This was actually done in collaboration with A3 Bangalore, and the director A3 was its partner, the Dr. Balachandra. He once proposed here, we had a workshop, he proposed that how can we engage communities because in South, people get engaged in such activities. Somebody remarked from the audience that, sir, this work is only in South, not probably here. So my point is some of that attitude has to change. Now, and world over, how can we basically change this? There are a number of examples. I'm just sort of adding the anecdotes. This is a picture that I took when I was returning at the Baltimore airport. Look at this. These are the teas made from the bottles, plastic bottles, t-shirts. And these are the bags made from these plastic bottles, right? So since this plastic waste is a reality, we see it day in and day out everywhere. We have these heaps of these. There are now world over many, sort of approaches to make wealth out of this waste. And very successful ventures. The companies that deal with it are highly profit-making companies. So my point is, can we somehow think of also something of this sort? Because jobs are rare, other things are rare. Can people like you who are young and resourceful also in terms of your energy and knowledge, think of how best we can tackle these local environmental issues in an innovative way, so as to make some value-added products out of them, right? This is something which is basically in practice elsewhere. And one thing that I would suggest, I mean, before I conclude, I would like to re-emphasize that globally now this One Health slogan is something that is kind of leading the rules, right? I sometimes think that, I mean, we need to have the way we have these health centers for human beings. We need to have ecological health centers, right? And in an ecological health center, you need to have a representation from diverse expertise. We need to have a cytogeneticist, we need to have a taxonomist, we need to have an ecologist, right? Plant ecologist, animal ecologist, microbial ecologist for that, but we need to have soil scientist, we need to have hydrologist, we need to have natural cycling and a stable isotope specialist, right? Plant physiologist, sociologist, so on. You can keep on adding. That's why I put it like this. I mean, if you really want to achieve that One Health perspective, because now it is realized post-pandemic, then it was found that this disease has actually emerged from the, jumping off the virus from its wild resources, its wild host to the human host. And the reason is, or for that matter, not only that, if you look at nowadays, I mean, here also in our context, human wild conflict, right? And we all know what are the reasons for that. I mean, I don't want to actually share that, but really, it's a heart-wrenching event that we saw in the Paragram recently or elsewhere, right? So my point is, if we are fiddling with our environment in such a way, we are fiddling with our ecology in such a way, don't you think that we need to have the health centers for our ecosystems as well, right? And these ecological health centers for imparting training to different people, so that we can enhance the ecosystem services that we have otherwise lost because of the anthropogenic impacts on these natural resources, right? So these are the best times that should kind of trigger us to ponder about these issues, and how best we can become a part of the solution is something we should take away from talks like this, or from discussions like this. You are having this webinar series for that matter on different issues as well. So what I would like to actually conclude with, because you are all the young minds, you have a long way to go in life. Again, sharing a photograph which I took in the New York Library Museum. Look at this. One thing is important. There was a cartoon. I mean, it would sort of, it was a it was an active sort of thing, animated thing. It would, if you go there, just outside there, you'll see that it is always pointing you, and they have put this Einstein's cartoon, and it somehow asks you one thing is important: not to stop questioning, right? And this gentleman, whom you see on the right side, he said that we, as students, as teachers especially, need to ask questions about the problems that we face. We need to basically raise hypotheses every day, right? I mean, say why it is all happening around us. Who are the people who are responsible for this? What could be the possible solutions? How can we become part of the solution rather than the part of the problems, right? So these are the basically issues which we need to sort of take home. And as students, my advice would be that more you question, more you sort of think out of box about the issues that we confront, more is the possibility of you coming out with an innovative solution or solutions to the problems that we are facing. So for the local environment is concerned, local ecology is concerned, and this hypothesis building has to be a habit. He says that we have to ask every morning at the breakfast at least 2 new questions or raise 2 new hypotheses, right? Not withstanding the fact that at the supper or the dinner, if you feel that both the questions that you ask in the morning were silly, were stupid, doesn't matter, throw them in the dustbin. But this should not stop you asking new questions next morning, right? So until unless this question asking attitude is not with us, hypothesis building attitude is not with us, we cannot think of innovative solutions, right? As students, you have to be always asking good questions, right? Because in research we believe that good quality research always is determined by the quality of the question that you ask, right? So with this, I would conclude. I would stop here. I thank you all for your participation, and I would surely be happy to answer your questions if you have any. If there are any questions, I would be glad to take them.
Now the session is open for questions. If there are any questions, students can put the questions in the chat box. I request students to please put your questions in the chat box. So it was a knowledge imparting deliberation. You talked about sustainable development goals, how the ecosystem services can become disservices due to human actions. So you talked about stresses, human stresses, if they are reduced, natural stresses will be mitigated on their own. You showed a picture of the man who had volunteered for some environmental work. He was doing some good, in his country, in his place. But we never think in these lines here. So we don't, whatever problem we have here in our valley or in our country or state, we put at it, every problem we put on the shoulder of the government. We never think in these lines. Many issues can be resolved, many stresses can be reduced if we act sensibly. So I want to put a question here. So how long will it take for our people here, for our children? Let us not talk about our generation, but I say for our children to think in the lines in which the people, on those lines in which people in developed countries are, they're working on those lines right now. They consider their whole country, their whole place where they're living, they consider it their home. And as we saw that man who was working as a volunteer for his country, you will not see anybody, working on those lines here. But I wish that somebody, maybe in the future, some of our kids, some of our children. So what do you suggest? So how do we have to groom our children so that they work in these lines?
Well, I mean, this is a pertinent question. I believe the onus lies on us as parents, as teachers, as responsible citizens, first of all. The fact of the matter is that if our kids see us doing something good, somehow it imbibes, it has an sort of transforming impact. The fact of the matter is that, first of all, we have to have this sense, first of all, inculcate in us, I believe. For example, we are teachers or whatever, professors or whatever. I will give an example. Since you asked this question. Again, I was those days in Canada, and I used to work in a herbarium, right? And we were coming, my professor and myself, we were coming out of the herbarium, and there was a very old man who was going into the herbarium. And my professor, his name was Claude Levoy. He introduced me to this professor. He said that he is Professor Falana, and he has retired many years back, almost 20 years back, but not virtually retired. He is more functional, and that was it. And we departed. Next day, I found this old man in the herbarium working on one of the sites. And out of curiosity, I asked him, what are you working on? He said that when I retired as a professor, I was basically a taxonomist. I was a plant taxonomy professor, and I was working on the flora of these polar regions. And I had completed a lot of it, But when I retired, a lot of it was still yet to be completed. Since I happen to be the head of my community also, I happen to be my sort of community head for the social work these days. So half a day I spent with those activities, and for half the day I come over and identify the plants which people bring in, or I sometimes go myself also. I want to complete that flora before I die. And he said that he was doing it absolutely without any remuneration or any money or any this. Look at our situation. Look at our situation. When a person retires from the department, next day you will see we go and lock his room. We don't welcome them back. Just after retirement, you are entirely you are entirely finding yourself in a different world altogether, which is unfortunate. One part. So my point is, as teachers, for example, we need to sort of shift our attitudes that way. Second is uh, our kids cannot be transformed by just sloganeering and lecturing and all that, until and unless we do not demonstrate some success stories and some sort of stories to them. I'll give you an example. 2-4 साल पहले की बात है, we were in this project only, जो UNDP वाला project है, इसी बाला चंद्र के साथ we were in Dal Lake in the boat. एक बच्चा था, he was coming out of the house boat, है ना, वो जो उसका घर ही उनका होता है वो, he was coming out of that in a boat and having the chocolate, and once he had the chocolate, he threw the wrapper into the waters, and this Bala asked him that, hey kid, why did you do this? He said that his idea was like, it's an ultimate dustbin for us. He was not given to understand what happens because of this. So my point is, the need of imparting this environmental education to our young generation is paramount. And how can we do that? Question is this: we need to engage these young students actually in practically in some sort of, I believe in some sort of, say, local cleaning, institutional cleaning. This is one part of it. Or we need to somehow demonstrate to them the value of this biodiversity, because if you have not told your students, for that matter, or your own kids, how worth a species is, how valuable a species is, or for example, if in your lawn you have the flowers and you would never allow them to basically pluck the flowers or cut them. Why? Because you have somehow imparted them, this is very important, you should not do this. But this is something which we need to sort of do at a massive scale in our society. And it has to be, I believe, of course, a part of our curriculum, but it has, how to put it, there are people who do it in very successful ways elsewhere. For example, there was a program you can go school to school and basically have a specific, demonstration about the ecosystem services that they provide to us. In southern India, they do it, right? And there are very good dividends. So my point is, and then for that matter, I believe our religious scholars, especially our imams, can play a great role. If somehow we have lost that, what you call as cultural wisdom, or the traditional wisdom we used to have. Look at Kashmir, for example. We used to be, guided by the values of our Sufis and saints. Look at the Sheikhul Alam, you look at his poetry. Look at, for that matter, other people who were living in the natural abodes completely in an eco-friendly way. So that traditional wisdom somehow needs to be inculcated, and there are many ways you can do it, I believe, provided we are really interested. Instead of talking about it, we want to practically do it, and it can be done. I'm pretty sure about that.
Yes, sir. You're right. We need to have this as a part in our curriculum. Children will learn from us also, but they need to have this as a part of their curriculum. Besides learning things, studying things from books, they can learn by doing these activities. So I think that is one of the best ways. And then we have to revive our culture. That is right. That was another point which you said that was very correct. We need to revive our culture. We had these things in our culture, but we have lost them. We're losing them, slowly. There are some questions in the chat box. Kamran Nisar had put a question, and he had given some reference from Khushal sir. Kamran Nisar, if you can unmute yourself. Kamran Nisar, if you can unmute yourself. He had Kamran Nisar.
What is the question that she has?
Kamran Nisar ने question put किया था, but I can't see that question now. Okay. Almost everyone speaks brilliantly, but what is important is action. He has given us information that a very humble effort changed a lot in Khushal sir.
Yes.
So, sir, he has a request. Please, people have lakes and authority, so please do something for the rest of environment, including lakes and waterways. So Kamran Nisar is concerned about lakes and waterways, and he has given the reference of Kushal sir. So would you add something to his?
Yeah, I mean, that is a wonderful demonstration of how effective people's engagement in addressing such ecological or environmental issues can be. The issue is, again, I mean, until and unless you do not link, or we do not link our existence, our survival to the survival of our ecosystems, we will not care about it more. That's very important. If you look at the Nigin part of the lake or this Kushal sir, the people who are engaged in this, I surely appreciate their effort. But fact of the matter is that they also realize that they cannot afford to have, their immediate ambience in such a foul-smelling way that would tell upon their health. The point is, until and unless we do not become conscious of the value that these natural ecosystems have, I will give you a small example. I don't know, Susanna ji, if you were there when we used to work on the Hokersar wetland once and along that survey. I still remember that question we asked to an old man. It again and again comes to my mind. When we asked him, Chacha chon ke khayal ashu agar ye na yat khasha na yat mutlaq na to Hokersaras mutlaq. Tor mutim dobun hai gubra yes na ye vesiti kya varan chui ball iska roz daini. And then we basically engaged with him in some sort of conversation. When we made him understand that iska ye value, and he said, oh no, so my point is, people sometimes do not realize this. So yes, you are right. We need to have it as the part of the curriculum. Yes, right from the very beginning, that helps. But until and unless people are not engaged practically, for example, Kushal sir mein when people engage practically in doing something, this became an example. We cite this example, and those people who are part of doing this feel really elated and encouraged, and they will be doing it surely again in due course of time. So my point is, we as responsible parents, to citizens or the teachers need to engage. And there is one more way. For example, sometimes I believe if you make some, the social media engagement these days is also very effective. It's a platform which helps a great deal. If you take one specific target area and then start building awareness, mobilizing thoughts, that in turn automatically mobilizes the action as well in due course of time. So my point is that is there also, and sometimes producing these documentaries is very effective on a topic and mass awareness. But there is no substitute. I have seen in the West especially, what they do is they do not teach children much in the classroom. They take them out most of the time in the museums, in the natural sort of forests, in the water bodies, in many other places like mineral areas, wildlife, these areas, and you demonstrate children these things well in the field, and they automatically, it remains always in their back of mind. Yes, once they see it, right? And then there are always young people who get motivated once they realize that yes, it's an issue, right? So, but that motivation factor has to come from the elders, from the teachers, and from the parents, as I I believe. Yeah.
Okay, sir. So I also think that scientists like you have, they need to have an influence on the policy makers. Because policy makers, they're not scientists. They are bureaucrats. They are very learned people. But I think they don't take scientists. They don't consult scientists. They are making policy. So I think it's very important.
I have a different opinion about that. Elsewhere, you will see in the West or US for that matter, you will see science surely drives the policy by and large, right? But the fact of the matter is that the science that they do is highly credible, right? Sometimes the way we do science here is very confusing to the bureaucrats and the politicians who are not scientists themselves. For example, 5 people work on the Dal Lake in the same year, come out with 5 different reports on water quality or the impacts. And it's very hard for you to convince the bureaucrats which one is the correct strategy, right? So my point is that somewhere we have to also understand that the kind of science that is being done here in our part of the world probably has also its issues, not to basically have impact on the policy making bodies or the policy makers the way it does elsewhere. But other way around, I also believe that as scientists, our job is to basically get the real data out, get the real trends out, alarm on scientific grounds about the issues. At the end of the day, policymakers then ultimately understand. They have no option but to understand. You see, pandemic was basically shown you. Pandemic made there is no respite beyond science. I mean, ultimately science came out in the solution. When something is there, when other solutions are there, which are science-based solutions, that's very important. So denying science is not a basic issue. That is why, but the science must be done in a very credible and way. That, to my understanding, is something which is important.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for the wonderful and enlightening talk. And I also thank the participants for listening very patiently. And I thank Amran Nisar for putting a question in there. Now I take the lead and I request Dr. Mahara Mansur to present the board hands.
Assalamu alaikum everyone and good afternoon. So we have reached to the end of this informative webinar. Today I, Dr. Mahara Mansur, take opportunity to put my gratitude into words. On behalf of Department of Botany, it's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. Wholeheartedly, I must thank our Madam Principal Professor Dr. Yasmin Ashai ma'am for her support and guidance for facilitating to organize this webinar, as